We have lost Arctic sea ice at a drastic rate over the last couple of years, especially in 2007. 2007 has seen only 40% of the summer sea ice compared to the long-term average. Here we see something like a canary in the coal mine. The Arctic is our indicator of climate change happening. And what concerns us most is that the canary is not only singing anymore, it is actually almost dead.
Now, the Arctic is a key climate change issue. So the work we do is global, in fact. We try to bring the message about what's happening in the Arctic to the world. We try to explain to people that the Arctic is the first sign of climate change. The impacts are already profound. People know about the polar bear, they know about the sea ice, and now we need to help them understand that they can change, they can make a difference, and we can protect the Arctic.
These words were spoken by Dr. Martin Sommerkorn, Senior Climate Change Advisor for the World Wildlife Arctic Program, in an effort to motivate the world to take action to counter the change that is occurring in the world's climate. In studying climate change, several questions must be addressed. When and why did the change start? What is the evidence that suggests that the problem is still occurring and will probably get worse? And finally, what is the results of any of these changes? Before we can address any of these questions, we must first understand the relationship between the Earth and the Sun's radiation. Scientists have long known that the presence of an atmosphere keeps the surface of the planet warmer than it would be without an atmosphere. In fact, without an atmosphere, the surface of the Earth would be about 30 degrees Celsius cooler than it is now. In order to understand why, we need to consider the surface of the Earth and its atmosphere separately. Because there is a radiative equilibrium, we know that the planet emits enough long-wave radiation to equal the solar radiation absorbed by it. However, most of the long-wave radiation that is emitted by the planet into space is emitted by the atmosphere rather than the surface of the Earth beneath it. Although the surface does emit long-wave radiation, only about 10% of this radiation passes through the atmosphere and escapes into space. The rest is absorbed by the clouds and the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. These greenhouse gases include carbon dioxide, water, methane, and CFCs. The higher the concentration of these gases, the more heat is retained. Since we know that the gases in the atmosphere, especially the greenhouse gases, control the temperature of the Earth, is there any evidence to show that the climate is indeed changing? Global changes in temperature would be an indication of a climate change, so let's look at the data. This graph shows the global temperature change from the period of 1860 to 2000. It is fairly easy to see the trend of the temperature change is increasing and in fact accelerating in recent years, as evidenced by the increase in the slope of the data trend. One cause of the temperature change could be an increase in the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. A record of their concentrations over thousands of years have been found in the ice formations at the poles. This image shows how the concentration of carbon dioxide has been increasing, especially recently. This is a photograph of a typical ice core that has been used to collect data on the concentrations of carbon dioxide. After viewing the graphs on changing temperature and carbon dioxide concentrations, it is apparent there was a drastic modification to the environment in the late 1800s and has been accelerating to this day. If we take a look back at the past 100 years of the planet's history, a possible cause for these changes is evident. The Industrial Revolution began in the late 1800s in England. It soon spread throughout the world. The revolution brought about changes in how products were made and distributed to consumers. Previous to this time, nearly everything was handmade. In an effort to become more efficient and profitable, new factories and transportation networks were developed. This meant that fuels would be needed to supply the power to keep the industry going. The burning of fossil fuels is a fairly cheap source of energy, and both industry and transportation developed products that used it as a fuel. Coal has been used to generate electricity and provide heat. Crude oil has been used not only for these things, but also as a fuel for the internal combustion engine. As the world's population increased, the demand and use of these fuels has increased, producing more carbon dioxide, which is released into the atmosphere. It is this increased rate of emissions that has been linked to the climate change. Consequences of this environmental change have been far-reaching in many areas of our life. Let's take a few minutes to enumerate several of the problems that have become apparent. One of the results of the rise in global temperature is the increased number and severity of storms. This view from space shows a hurricane that is nearly 250 miles across with winds of 150 miles per hour. This is Hurricane Katrina, which devastated the Gulf Coast in 2002, causing millions of dollars of damage. Individual families throughout the world have lost homes and family members to these huge storms. The loss of sea ice in the polar regions, as well as the reduction in size of many glaciers, is an environmental concern among scientists. Habitats are being destroyed and animal populations are at risk. These photographs of the Riggs Glacier dramatically demonstrate the changes that have been occurring. The rise in temperature of the atmosphere could bring a rise in sea level from the melting of the sea ice and from the thermal expansion of the water in the oceans. This diagram of the Chesapeake Bay region shows how the rise in sea level could change the topography of the land. With the changing weather patterns will come extreme droughts in some regions. As you can see, entire lakes can be lost and the ground will become bone dry. The lack of water will increase the possibilities of wildfires. Recent wildfires have been so large that they can be seen from space. This introductory video on climate change has briefly highlighted how the Earth and its atmosphere absorb energy and how that process could become a potential problem. Some of the evidence indicating that the problems are occurring and what may be causing these problems was introduced. The effect of change in climate have far-reaching consequences, forcing the world to address this issue.